Well, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from. I could fully appreciate the lonely sentiment of a galactic farm boy from long, long ago and far, far away. I started out as a child, a post-war baby boomer raised in the flatlands of northwestern Ohio to provincial, middle-class, small-town sensibilities. Life there was bland, workaday tedium. The most excitement my kidhood had to offer was watching the weeds grow. So you can guess just how electrifying the notion of flying saucers visiting from outer space was to the festering pre-adolescent imagination of an Ohio hayseed like myself. UFOs were a big deal back in the 50s. Although Hollywood movie saucers were the only ones I ever actually saw myself, even as a grade school kid I realized how grown-ups were genuinely concerned that something flying in our skies could not be accounted for. There were too many stories and photographs of circular flying machines, physical craft of intelligent design which could not be accounted for given our 20th century understanding of aerodynamics. No wings, no propellers, no turbojets, no rockets. Yet somehow these machines were able to fly by means unknown to earthly physics. So if they were not built by Earth humans, the unavoidable conclusion remained that they must have been built by somebody from somewhere else. And that could only mean that these flying contraptions were likely flown by intelligences from other worlds far out in space. By the 1950s, we actually lived our daily lives in a science fiction reality. The notion of flying saucers seemed to naturally fit into our world of atomic bombs, supersonic planes, rockets, and Sputniks. It was all as much a part of growing up as hot dogs, French fries, and soda pop. Little did we realize how much those Hollywood movie saucers were part of a very real UFO cover-up. In the years immediately following World War II, the United States military discovered that UFOs were a serious national defense issue. Secrecy was of utmost importance. Thus a carefully crafted public perception of this phenomenon was being engineered by the men in power. As the legend goes, an unidentified craft crashed in the New Mexico desert in the summer of 1947 that appeared to be of alien design. President Harry S. Truman ordered an immediate investigation under strictest security to assess the implications of this event. A rash of UFO sightings were reported across the country, even the nation's capital as well. Our military leaders concluded that UFOs were serious business. Air Force General Nathan Twining stated, "The phenomena reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. There are objects probably approximating the shape of a disk of such appreciable size as to appear to be as large as man-made aircraft. The reported operating characteristics, such as extreme rates of climb, maneuverability, and action, which must be considered evasive when sighted or contacted by friendly aircraft and radar, lend belief to the possibility that some of the objects are controlled either manually, automatically, or remotely." Director of the CIA, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, added, "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense." Faced with such conclusions, it was determined that a campaign be mounted to defuse the potential for a general public panic. Al Chop, the United States Air Force Project Blue Book civilian press officer, admitted, "We've been ordered to work up a national debunking campaign, planting articles in magazines and arranging broadcasts to make UFO reports sound like poppycock." UFOs were routinely dismissed as weather balloons or misidentified natural phenomena. Yet behind closed doors, a secret bureau was formed to deal exclusively with the issue of UFOs. Official public policy declared that nothing out of the ordinary exists. Yet at the same time, Air Force General Nathan Twining insisted to President Truman that the alien issue was bigger than the Manhattan Project and required that it be managed on a larger scale and obviously for a longer period. They would form nothing less than a government within the government, sustaining itself from presidential administration to presidential administration, regardless of whatever political party took power, and ruthlessly guarding their secrets while evaluating every new bit of information on flying saucers they received. However, behind the scenes, they would allow disclosure of some of the most far-fetched information, whether true or not, because it would help create a climate of public attitude that would be able to accept the existence of extraterrestrial life without a general sense of panic. This secret ad hoc military bureau was named Majestic 12, or MJ-12. In 1953, Dwight Eisenhower was elected President of the United States. Ike was a national hero. As Supreme Commander of Allied forces in World War II, General Eisenhower had won a great victory over Nazi Germany. As President, his ambition was to return America to a healthy peacetime economy, to see that the GIs who had sacrificed so much in the war enjoyed a well-earned future of civilian prosperity. Unfortunately, the growing menace of global communist expansion, fueled by Soviet military aggression, threatened Ike's fragile dream of post-war tranquility. Only increased American weapons spending could hold the Russians at bay. And yet behind the scenes, MJ-12 and the alien issue grew more complex. Exactly how much Ike knew about the alien issue is lost in the fog of time. Rumors persist that Ike actually met with aliens on perhaps more than one occasion. True or not, the military establishment saw extraterrestrials as a potential threat against which we had no defense. So very likely an accelerated research and development program was secretly engaged to gain par with ET technology. Flying saucers offered a coveted military advantage equal to the Holy Grail. A concurrent rumor at this time was that Nazi science had discovered secrets of anti-gravity during the war. Occult groups in Germany were even supposed to have made contact with ETs. It is curious to note that during the Nazi war crimes trials in Nuremberg, Prime Minister Winston Churchill allegedly ordered all references to the occult activities of the Third Reich be stricken from the official record. As well, the Rockefeller Foundation paid $139,000 in 1946 to commission the publishing of an official history of World War II that deleted any and all references to the mystical and occult influences within the Nazi regime. One of the major Rockefeller financial interests was Standard Oil. With this in mind, it is important to note that one of Dwight Eisenhower's major presidential campaign contributors was the Rockefeller family. In fact, just prior to his election, Ike asked Nelson Rockefeller to chair an advisory committee on government reorganization, and following Ike's election, Rockefeller proceeded to implement organizational changes in the Department of Defense. In turn, Ike signed Executive Memorandum NSC 5510, establishing MJ-12 as a permanent committee to oversee and conduct all covert activities concerning the alien question. This granted MJ-12 total autonomy and absolute secrecy. It did not answer to the Congress or the public at large. Vast monies for the enormously expensive alien-related defense projects at secret bases like Area 51 had to come from concealed sources. By his second term, Ike began to realize how his own executive authority was becoming overshadowed by Defense and Intelligence Department agendas. In 1957, the Russian Sputnik satellite, beeping in high orbit above the United States, warned a fearful population that Soviet rocket technology was now far more advanced than our own. Was American military might falling behind? and was Ike to blame? In 1960, Ike was scandalized again when our top-secret U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia. The United States was labeled a second-rate power in the press. A vast increase in military spending was demanded. As his popularity waned, Ike knew a covert agenda was afoot. Seeing full well the growing power of the conglomerate he himself had helped create, Ike warned upon leaving office in 1961,
"We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist."
Despite Ike's warning, a new governmental structure was being solidly formed. Elected officials were very quickly taken out of the loop so as to remove any threat of interference. Even presidents were notoriously careless with classified information and could not be trusted to maintain vital secrets. John F. Kennedy, Ike's successor, was quick to feel the overbearing weight of this invisible power structure. In fact, only 4 months after taking office, JFK warned the American Newspaper Publishers Association, "There is grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment." The failed invasion of Cuba brought Kennedy into direct conflict with covert agendas being engineered by the CIA and the defense establishment. As a result, he fired CIA Director Allen Dulles and promised to break the agency into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. As well, Kennedy stood to block his defense chiefs from launching a major protracted war in Southeast Asia. But the momentum of the military-industrial juggernaut would not be resisted. At Columbia University, just 10 days before his assassination, Kennedy again warned, "The high office of the president has been used to foment a plot against the American people. Before I leave office, I must inform the citizen of his plight." Too late. Kennedy would be the last president to openly challenge MJ-12. Using the space race as a public relations cover, very intensive reverse engineering research revealed the basic free energy technology and physics behind these ET spacecraft. It was precisely at this point that the decision was made to increase the secrecy to an unprecedented level, to keep knowledge of these amazing technologies absolutely hidden from the public. The basic physics behind the UFO energy generation and propulsion systems were such that they could easily replace all existing energy generation and propulsion systems on the Earth, shattering the monetary status quo of the entire geopolitical and economic order. In 1981, after taking office as President of the United States, Ronald Reagan met with CIA Director William Casey and his advisors at Camp David, Maryland, between March 6th and 8th. President Reagan was briefed on the subject of unidentified flying objects and extraterrestrial visitation of planet Earth. Transcripts of that meeting, if authentic, reveal additional insights into MJ-12's operations. Along with William Casey, Reagan was briefed by an agency operative introduced simply as the caretaker. This man claimed to be custodian of the UFO secrets for 31 years, and that he had briefed Presidents Nixon and Ford as well. President Carter, he said, was not in the loop. The caretaker revealed an important operation developed over the years to safeguard UFO information. We call it Project Dove. It is a complex series of covert operations by our military intelligence agencies to disinform the public. As you know, Mr. President, we have some highly classified aircraft. In order to keep these aircraft secret, we tend to convince at times the public and press that maybe UFOs are real in order to make the public think what they are seeing are actually UFOs instead of our own secret aircraft, even though we know maybe some of the sightings are of actual UFOs. If you consider the first person who helped us with this disinformation program, Mr. George Adamski, back in the early 50s, and up to all the movie productions of UFO-related movies, this helps the public to keep their minds open, but also allows us to keep our secret aircraft away from the public's knowledge. Mr. President, the first cooperative venture was the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. That was a cooperative venture with the United States Air Force and the movie industry. As well, we provided the basic subject matter for the movie Close Encounters. Reagan's briefing reveals just how far down the food chain elected officials are in regard to access to classified information. Also, it showed how completely dependent our elected executives are to the selective facts given to them by the Intelligence Bureau. Was it by chance that Reagan survived an attempted assassination at the end of March in 1981? His successor would have been George Herbert Walker Bush, former director of the CIA. However, it was President Reagan who publicly speculated about the possible reality of extraterrestrials.
I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
Back in 1960, as our own manned spaceflights were being planned, the Brookings Institution was commissioned to examine the social impact of extraterrestrial discovery in a study prepared for NASA. Proposed studies on the implications of peaceful space activities for human affairs. This report concluded that anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values, attitudes, and behavior. As such, fear of disturbing the existing social order was motivation for maintaining secrecy regarding discovery of alien civilizations. This rationale was echoed by former Special Assistant to the Executive Director of the CIA, Victor Marchetti, in 1979. The purpose of the international UFO cover-up conspiracy is to maintain a working stability between the nations of the world, and for them, in turn, to retain institutional control over their respective populations. Such posturing sounds legitimate enough, but former National Security Advisor to President Eisenhower, Colonel Philip Corso, saw darker motivations behind the obsessive cover-up. But we in the defense agencies were fighting so deeply immersed in the darkness of our own denial that the fantastic nature of the UFO truth, the ongoing effects of the truth, and the capitulation of the civilian intelligence services to some crazed blueprint they had for world order based on an international government sometimes made us doubt our own senses. So who are the modern inheritors of MJ-12's power and authority? Does this vast compartmentalized agency still serve to protect the security and welfare of our nation's citizens as it was intended? Or does it follow a secret rogue agenda to actually create a one-world international government? Researcher and disclosure advocate Dr. Stephen Greer sees this covert conglomerate as a monster out of control. President Eisenhower had seen the ET craft and deceased ET bodies. He knew of the covert programs dealing with the situation, but he also knew that he had lost control of these projects and that they were lying to him about the extent and full nature of their research and development activities. The infrastructure needed to maintain and expand the level of secrecy which can deceive presidents and CIA directors and senior congressional leaders and European prime ministers and the like is substantial and illegal. Let me be clear. The entity which controls the UFO matter and its related technologies has more power than any single government in the world or any single identified world leader. The inescapable reality is this. This secret project, no matter how well-intentioned initially, got carried away with its own secret power. It abused this power. It has hijacked our future for 50 years. The reasons for secrecy are clear: global power, economic and technological control, geopolitical status quo, the fear of scandal surrounding the exposure of such projects, and their irresponsible managemental behavior. Researcher David Wilcock further stated, "The military-industrial complex refers to the wide variety of corporations controlled by both the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, related to military and defense industries, including all the classified UFO-related projects." According to researcher Richard Boylan, the top-secret ET reality was indeed a major interest of the global power brokers. In March 1954, President Eisenhower protested that humans were not ready and needed time to be prepared for adjusting to this stupendous reality. 2 months later, on May 29, 1954, President Eisenhower's CIA director, Walter Beadle Smith, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, David Rockefeller, and other top world financiers and Western power leaders convened the inaugural meeting of the Bilderberg Group. One of the early items on the Bilderberg agenda was the contact by the Star Nations. Shortly after establishing itself, the Bilderberg Group collaborated with the Council on Foreign Relations, another international policy body devoted to world management. They discussed the problem of adjusting humankind to star visitors' presence. Elite members of the Bilderberg and CFR jointly decided in the mid-1950s to begin a series of accommodations with the Star Nations. Were treaties and arrangements being brokered with ETs by these world managers beyond presidential or constitutional authority? In 1947, MJ-12 started out as a select handful of military officers and scientists. But just look at this sample of who the major players are today. former director of Lockheed's top-secret Skunk Works facility in famed Area 51, Ben Rich, who was in charge of the operations from 1975 to 1991, stated, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity." Rich also added, "Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." In other words, the public be damned. So now we find ourselves locked in a winner-take-all monopoly game orchestrated by the monetary rulers of the world, the robber barons.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
Remember the Ovid quote, "Treason doth never prosper, for if it prosper, none dare call it treason." What drives their single-minded obsession with absolute control? Recall the words of David Rockefeller to the Council on Foreign Relations. "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promise of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government, the supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in the past centuries. So here's the recipe for total control. Politics is power, nothing more. The organizing principle of any society is for war. The authority of the state over its people resides in its war powers. The existence of an accepted external menace, then, is essential to social cohesiveness, as well as to the acceptance of political authority. The menace must be believable, it must be of a magnitude consistent with the complexity of the society threatened, and it must appear, at least, to affect the entire society. But is it even possible that concerned American citizens can in any way wring honest disclosure from a clandestine agency that in over 50 years has likely gained more autonomous power and authority than the nation it was commissioned to defend? How could congressional oversight be brought to bear against an agency that was specifically designed to function fully independent of the Congress, conveniently walled behind an impenetrable shield of national security? The tail, I fear, now wags the dog, and even more so now in the post-9/11 era. After 8 years of the Bush administration's overbearing anti-terrorist paranoia, disclosure seems more tenuous and remote than ever. A sinister darkness has descended upon our national leadership. America's ruling elite exhibit thinly masked contempt for the rank-and-file citizens they claim to serve. Monies earmarked to bolster the sinking economy simply disappear. A staggering $9 trillion vanishes, and the Inspector General of the Federal Reserve can't manage to account for its whereabouts. How ludicrous. Could anyone possibly expect any kind of honest disclosure from such irresponsible leadership? But such a vast amount of money doesn't just disappear. Someone in Washington knows exactly where that money is. And so the question must be asked, is the rapidly escalating deterioration of America's government directly linked to the unrevealed agendas of the military-industrial complex and its alien allies? It is perhaps an extraordinary irony that the views expressed in that Brookings Institution report, prepared so many years ago, actually foretold our current plight. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways. Our society has literally become disintegrated by the robber barons artificially suppressing human progress for the sake of their status quo. The Brookings report also observed, others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values, attitudes, and behavior. The robber barons have engineered an economic prison here that is impervious to change. And yet isn't the evolutionary imperative to adapt or perish? Like it or not, I fear the time has come for a major attitude adjustment that accommodates change. We don't need a new world order. Instead, we need a new world view. A new world view that embraces revolutionary changes that can transform the lives of everyone on this planet for the better. We've been shackled to a worldview of classical physics that has outworn its usefulness, a view that sees the universe as a mindless mechanical clockworks, that humanity exists as a random biological accident lost in a lifeless, soulless cosmos. A new worldview of quantum physics envisions humanity as co-creators participating in the fabric of a vital living cosmos, full of unlimited potential, that offers astounding advances in interstellar space travel, time travel, telepathy, and free energy technologies. A new world that lies just beyond our fingertips. A new world that already exists behind the locked doors and barbed wire of the military-industrial complex. What if a fundamental shift of values, attitudes, and behavior liberated the human race from economic slavery imposed by the ruling robber barons, permitting it to realize its full potential as individualized expressions of a universal consciousness shared equally by all living beings across the cosmos. Would that change not be worth embracing rather than resisting? Like it or not, the universe we live in is emergent, not stagnant, and change is urgently pressing upon us now. Disclosure is fast becoming an imperative, not an option. To oppose this change may prove fatal. Carl Sagan stated, "A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed."